Afghanistan fell to the Taliban in days. That's after the U.S. spent $83 billion on training and equipping the military and police forces. Jason Dempsey is adjunct senior fellow for the Military Veterans and Society program at the Center for New American Security. He's a veteran of the war in Afghanistan. Jason, welcome to the program.
Great to be here.
Tell us first, Jason, how the training of Afghan forces was managed. How were people recruited? How long did it take?
Well, I think what people need to realize just right off the bat, this was a bureaucratic endeavor. Right? No matter what confidence you may or may not have had in the uniformed figures who came across your TV screens year after year and talked about progress, it was ultimately the machinations of a bureaucracy at war. And the other part of this, I think, needs to be very clear from the start. Every single time a senior U.S. military leader told you that training the Afghans was our #1 priority and the way we were going to get out of Afghanistan and just the most important thing we could do, it was flat out a lie. And I say that very clearly and very explicitly because the institution never resourced it, never took it seriously, and never looked at, well, are we building something that's not just going to be a house of cards the moment we pull out?
But Jason, how do you say it was never resourced? I mean, $83 billion is a lot of money.
Oh, it's a lot of money. And the question is, how do we spend it? I would encourage everyone here who's watching Government Matters, if you haven't already, go to the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. He's been detailing year after year after year the massive fraud, waste, and abuse that has taken place in our reconstruction efforts and in our efforts to stand up the military. I think when we talk about all this money, really, it's about, did we spend it smartly, right? Just because we have weapons, just because we have money, doesn't mean it's effective. And that's a hard lesson, I think, for folks to learn, particularly when we've all grown to believe that the military can be the solution to all of our foreign policy problems.
Okay, then how, Jason, was the military measuring success? How did they know?
We were measuring it on inputs, not outcomes. And ultimately what we did was we confused training the military for tactical operations, frontline stuff, and just handing them weapons. We assumed that the infrastructure needed to actually keep those weapons in operation and the willpower, the political willpower to keep them fighting, well, the military assumed that somebody else was taking care of that problem. And that was always the structural flaw. And what you saw was the result of that came out with the rapid collapse of the Afghan military, right? And there's two dimensions to that. The main one, of course, is lack of political will. What they saw behind them was a government that was always perceived as highly predatory, often illegitimate. And when push came to shove and they're on their own, the question is, well, do you fight for that? The second element, where the U.S. military is more responsible for this failure, is we built an Afghan force that looked like us without thinking, what do you need to fight like the American Army fights? You need functioning bureaucracies. You need a highly educated population. You need people able to manage and employ highly technical, logistically dependent systems like air power. None of that existed in Afghanistan, but we propped it up just assuming that, well, someday maybe it'll happen. And for the American military, it was the easy button. Year after year, you could rotate through, make some superficial changes, do some training on tactical stuff, and just assume that the rest of the problem would magically be taken care of by somebody else.
Well, Jason, I want to go back to your first point, because some critics have said that the Afghan military just didn't have the will to fight. Is that something that you can train or inspire in people?
Well, for one, there's a little bit of nuance that needs to be taken here, because I do take offense at the idea that the Afghans can't fight, right? There is a narrative taking place that, well, they just collapsed. 60,000 folks on the Afghan side have died in the fight against extremism in Afghanistan over the last 10 years. They've given more than most Americans can even dream of, and their families have been at risk at the same time. They are true heroes. And what's confounding about this is what we did was we propped them up and put them out without addressing the core corruption at the heart of this, which was the Afghan government was simply not seen as legitimate, not to the degree that people would clearly side with it over the Taliban. And we propped them up and sent them out in a structure that made sense for the American military, but didn't make any sense for them. And so once we were not there to prop up this house of cards, they simply didn't have the ability to fight. And unfortunately, you just can't blame the Afghan soldier out on the front line for looking around and saying, you know what, it's time to cut my losses. You can and should blame Kabul elites and the American military that put together this system on the assumption that it would exist in perpetuity without our support.
Jason, you have said that now is the time that we have to ask the hard questions. What are those questions?
The hard questions are, one, who are we listening to now? And what are we actually learning, and what incentives do we have to reform? We just executed Vietnam 2.0. And we told ourselves we learned from Vietnam. And so now the question is, well, wait a minute, we didn't learn from Vietnam. And so what is it about our structures? What is it about our bureaucracies that make it hard to learn? And here's the challenge for your listeners and everybody working in the DC area, particularly those working in the national security space. Everybody who's leading the US military right now, everybody who's going to be leading the US military in 5 years, in 10 years, will have had many of their formative experiences in Afghanistan. And you might think that would be cause for reflection, but you have to recognize how the bureaucracy evaluated itself. All those people who are in leadership positions and will be in leadership positions were told overwhelmingly and consistently that they were doing a great job in contributing to a successful mission in Afghanistan. That's what bureaucracies do.
Jason, there's so much more to say on this, but we are out of time. Sorry about that. Thank you so much for being on the program.
Good luck. Thanks for covering it.